And we're live. Thank you all for joining us for the third panel discussion of the day. The topic of discussion is AI for sustainability. And I know those are two big, broad terms, so we're going to make it a little bit narrow in scope. AI is an application of artificial intelligence, and sustainability, we're going to focus on the technological aspect of it. Um, so with us is a deeply knowledgeable, diverse panel, geographically scattered around the world. So we're going to get many different interesting perspectives. We're going to ask that each of the panelists gives a brief introduction of who they are and what they do. And we're going to go down in alphabetical order, starting with Bilal.
Okay, thank you, Joaquin. Thank you for having us today here. My name is Bilal Ben Mahoya, resided in Morocco. I'm a knowledge graph architect freelancer, specializing in knowledge graphs, metadata management, linked data, and semantic technologies, with over 8 years of experience in semantic modeling, ontologies, and graph databases. I have held roles such as ontologist, knowledge engineer, and taxonomist. And currently, I'm freelancer on Upwork platform and also within Upwork company. I have actively contributed in building knowledge graphs in for the marketplace domain and HR field. And finally, I believe in the crucial role of ontologists in the modern world and views knowledge as divine message and the miracle of our current century.
Thank you very much, Bilal. I'll pass the mic over to you, Ignis.
Hello, everybody, and greetings from Switzerland. So I'm Ignas. I'm a data engineer and solutions lead, currently working in building a data platform in green tech space for a company selling superchargers and electric vehicle chargers, plus diverse energy solutions in Switzerland for the B2B. In the past, I had titles as a machine learning engineer, product owner, and data analyst in supply chains, e-commerce, automotive, logistics, and a few other industries.
Thank you very much, Ignis. Katie, would you like to go next?
Yeah, sure. Hello, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Katie Salamari. I'm a global solution lead for our IoT division. My focus is IoT use cases and applications for infrastructure and transportation. And my background is my PhD is in civil transportation engineering. I'm also an adjunct faculty of civil engineering at North Carolina State University. And happy to be here to talk about AI for sustainability.
Thank you very much. I think it would be good to lay the context on what is sustainability, and then we can dive into the aspects of sustainable AI. So if anybody wants to take a stab at defining the term sustainability, we can build off of that from there.
Yeah. I will probably have a go at it. So in the most abstract or hopefully simplest terms, for me, sustainability means way of living and doing business today without compromising the opportunities for the future. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Anybody want to add anything?
Yeah, sustainability, it's a question that can answer how we can improve the quality of life without compromising the ability for the next generation to meet their needs. So it encompasses social equity, economic development, and also aiming for balance where resources are used responsibly and efficiently.
And I would just add, the focus on environment, I think, is a very important factor for us when it comes to sustainability. If we have the approach for, environment, we want to have clean air, clean water, less congestion on the roadways, clean grounds and dirts to do farming. And so all these factors are impacting. These are the ones that we really need to protect. So I would look at it from a from a human-centric, environmental-centric perspective. So obviously, human being has a key player in this area, and the equity and the economic development for human being is the major factor. But also sometimes that is in contrast with the goals and the what benefits sustainability. So we're always in this trade-off between better economic development and a better quality of life, but also it's interesting that we aim for better quality of life, but also we might be taking actions that would impact the quality of life for now and future for other humans on this planet.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think those are excellent ideas. We want to make a living today, but we don't want to shortchange and profit today, but not have a sustainable future for other generations or other people or the environment. Um, so with that comes this idea of responsible AI, which is a broad-reaching term that sort of touches all these different areas of resource management and energy consumption and impact in society. So I invite you guys to talk a little bit about responsible AI from your perspective, and we'll harmonize that to sustainable practices.
I can start with that. So since we in the solutions that we develop, the IoT solutions that we develop, we have a major focus in responsible AI. And really the responsible AI comes from the fact that there's multiple aspects to a responsible AI. Equitable is part of it. Even trustworthy AI and responsible AI, they kind of go hand in hand. And these are all concepts that would essentially, they all mean that when we are developing AI models, first of all, our AI models are very comprehensive. They are trained on all these different factors, and the data sets are comprehensive to take into account different models and different scenarios. In terms of, let's put it this way, in terms of developing a bank loan AI to see who gets approved or not, we need to really take into account all the different demographics of peoples and backgrounds. And so that's part of being responsible AI. So it starts from the data, then it also moves into the models. So constant monitoring of the models to make sure that the models are staying true to the results and they're not essentially drifted. They're not getting away from the confidence intervals that we've set for them, and also the results. So how are the results are being presented and really comprehended? Because we can play with numbers, and so a lot of this is about, are we presenting the whole truth, or do we provide all the disclaimers that is required to provide when we're presenting the output of our AI model? So the data, the modeling, and then the results. So responsibility needs to be included in all the aspects of these three components.
Yes, I totally agree. If I could add something, I think what I also find interesting to know and to maybe to be mindful in the context that in terms of AI, we are really in very early stages. So the state of the art or the best ways of doing things are still not quite defined. I had quite a few conversations in this direction in big AI conferences where, let's say, researchers say, look, yes, we know we would like to have a biased data set, but let's say, how do we know? How can we monitor it? What is a good monitoring infrastructure? And it looks like, it will be coming soon in the next years. But right now, in loads of companies, they're still exploring and trying to see what's pragmatic, what is sustainable, and let's say, maybe what's clear. For example, one discipline that will be probably getting more prominent in the next 3 to 5 years will be LLM ops, which will be, let's say, it's monitoring, same equivalent for software development we had for the last 20 years. However, there will be some changes, and today it's still not always that easy to understand what it is. I think another interesting dimension is about the extent and degree of regulation. So let's say in the last months we've seen a lot of, let's say, philosophies between US and EU coming into different directions, namely EU AI Act, that, let's say, seem to have caused lots of opinions. Maybe let's say how much should we regulate and define and govern and document before we put something into production, or should we just allow to go with it, and then we manage by exceptions when we need to. So I believe that lots of people have loads of opinions for that, but I'm also curious to see how that will be evolving and what that means.
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, I want to add something here, Ignace. I totally agree. I see that you are focusing on the ethical and social sustainability, because, in fact, ensuring AI systems are designed and trained to minimize, for example, biases and promote fairness across different demographic groups. This is something that we need to think about, because after that we need to think about the transparency and the explainability of these AI models, because creating AI models that are transparent and whose decision-making process can be easily understood by user can help us in order to improve our life, okay? Because sometimes it's hard to trust an AI system, to be honest, because to trust AI model, you need to trust the data. To trust the data, you need to trust source of the data. And in order to trust source of the data, you need to evaluate the mechanism, how this data is generated, and how this data is evaluated and treated.
That's a great point. I think that transparency, I really wanted to emphasize that, because I think that's a great point. I mean, if you think about it, mostly neural network models, that's the core of the machine learning that impacts all these different AI models. They're all black box. So neural network models are black box. You really can understand how they come into this conclusion. So that transparency is very important.
Yes,
totally
that is
agree.
true. Yeah, there is, I think, one more thought came to my mind, maybe one more definition that maybe will become a thing a couple of years down the road. UX design for LLMs. It's also not a discipline that I have seen on my LinkedIn or newsfeed so far yet. However, when I spoke with some researchers and designers, they say, look, we have models, but we could also do a better job explaining the end users what this is, that the data, it's a recommendation, and AI, maybe it's a machine, and it's we should not give the impression that it comes from a human. So to kind of a bit to dehumanize AI and say, look, it's a recommendation based on a lot of mathematics, which might be very good, might be not be that very good, but we don't necessarily understand it. It could be good and bad, but just don't forget and don't assume that that was an expert giving you something, because things, it might need some validation.
Thank you very much for painting this very broad, diverse perspective of what is responsibility and all these attributes of what constitutes a responsible AI system. I think in discussing responsibility, we also have to discuss who are the actors that are responsible. We discussed the organization developing the system, and Ignace also talked about the governance of it. From how do we regulate and how do we ensure that it complies and it's not rampant in some biased way. There needs to be some way to ensure that whoever is working with this technology is kept in check to ensure that society is not going to be negatively impacted in a disproportionate way. Um, yeah. Does anybody want to add to who's responsible? The tool makers, the platforms.
In fact, related to the AI or no, everyone is responsible, from simple individual, okay, to the businesses, to the government, and to the no government, okay, organization. Okay, everyone is responsible. And let me focus here, okay, on the individuals. Okay, so because sometimes also our personal choices, okay, can change the ecosystem. For example, individuals can make significant impact through their daily decisions. This includes, for example, using, for example, I don't know, public transportation and choosing sustainable product. Okay, but we need to be aware of something. We need to be aware that we need to make choices that are based on on mechanisms, okay, that are based on logic. So that we need to think like a machine, okay, and better than a machine, and because at the end, the AI models are created by humans. Okay, we don't need to forget that. Okay, so and as humans, we have an awareness of the environment where we are living. Okay, so we are the source. So if we can analyze everything, you can find the following: as individuals, our personal choices shape the future. Okay, this future, and the AI, it's like an intermediate node in this future. Okay, so the AI communicate with the humans and take the ideas from humans and translate and interpret these ideas in order to give us something that we can consume. But at the end, these things are coming from individuals. Okay, yeah. So this is why I can see that individuals also responsible. We have also corporate responsibility for businesses. Okay, because businesses are major consumers of resources. Okay, and have substantial impact on the environment, and so on. For me, for the responsibility, I will not link the responsibility to the AI models, but I will link the responsibility to people that working on creating these AI models. Okay.
Yeah, if I may add to that, so in my opinion, I think it has to go from two ends. So it needs to be both top down and bottom up. So let me explain what I mean. So top down would mean that the biggest companies who are, let's say, like producing, consuming, working, publishing, or doing anything with AI, large language models, Gen AI, or any things that could be like black boxes. I think they have a lot of work to do, and they're already doing it to standardize and get some practices and put adequate data governance in place. So a couple of months ago, I've been in a conference in Europe for the top data summits, and I've seen that biggest companies who have like 10,000 plus employees, they have been ramping up data offices and with putting additional emphasis on governance, which let's say like 5 years ago did not seem to be that much of a deal. It's kind of been like a documentation in software. Nobody wants to do it, but like if no one does it, then it kind of things stop working, and at some point, let's say like there comes some legal consequences. Having said that, I also don't think that it's realistic to expect top down for the government or for the company CIOs to tell us what to do and what responsible means. So everybody, in my opinion, should be in, let's say, like doing their own, putting their 2 cents, within the scope where they're working. So for example, if I'm building a solution that is consuming some black box API coming from doesn't matter where, I have the responsibility to, well, first of all, to ask questions to make sure that I understand what I'm working with. So if, let's say, like it was not intuitive for the upstream producer, that we need more explanation where to use this data set, how much bias, how reliable is the data, it's my job to ask. And for anything I produce, it's also my job to communicate. Look, the goal of this data product, for example, has been this, and these are the boundaries, and these are no limitations. If you have some other use cases, either use it with warning or get back to me, so that at least we know we are not amplifying the bias, and we do, let's say, we do some documentation or communication and the bottom up to help people make better decisions. Like, is that the right thing to do or not? Because that also might depend from the perspective, from the use case, what is bias, and maybe bias data set for my use case might be good enough for some different use case if I take certain pieces out of it. Does that make sense?
Katie, any thoughts?
No, I agree with everybody that everything that Dignas and Bilal said. I think I fully agree with this being a top down and bottom up. And so, in terms of the governance is a very important factor of this, to make sure all these different links and that are connected, because it's all about data, the models that being created, and the output, and as Bilal said about the individuals, and so making sure that the governance, because one loose chain, as they saying, you're as weak as the weakest point that you have. So one loose chain in this one loose ring in this chain may cause any problems.
What about? I'm just gonna draw a quick parallel with the consumption of alcohol, with the consumption of tobacco and sugars or some other things. The manufacturer of these products are obligated by the government to put a warning label that if you consume or you engage with these substances, that it may cause, not that sometimes it shows you explicitly the causes and effects, but it causes an impact on your health, and extended use can lead to blank. Now, Open AI and other LLMs are coming out with these warning labels, but as we illustrated earlier in the conversation, people don't understand what these things are, and people have the propensity to project their humanity into this thing and believe that it has some form of intelligence. So, how do we navigate the cultural hurdles? Because we can point the finger and say, top down should, or bottom up should, or that person should, or if we're all pointing the finger, how do we take some ownership in that?
Yeah. Yeah.
That is a good question. I mean, I don't think I have a very good answer. What kind of like helped me to, let's say, understand and have a more, let's say, grounded expectations in my machine learning career was, let's say, understanding statistics and probability theory, that we say, look, whenever we make a decision, or let's say, we build a recommender that says, look, it's not that, it says the right answer is C, but it says, look, it's a 95% probability that the answer is C, which means that, if I ran it maybe 100 times, depending on what kind of inputs come in, there might be a small chance that there will be mistake. So I think, that happens in process heavy operations, for example, where we need to process millions, or let's say 1,000 documents. If we say, look, person on average, let's say makes 2 wrong decisions out of 100. So it means that on average, if I have made 1,000 decisions, I know that, yes, I probably overlooked a few things. Maybe I was tired, maybe I didn't pay attention, maybe something happened, maybe I had, let's say, a slippery finger. But once I'm aware that, there is a small chance, it doesn't mean that it's showstopper. It depends on the context, but always keep in mind, look, what is the probability and is it good enough? And often it can be good enough, but always know, look, it's never 100. So while in some things 95 is a great result, somewhere 76% could be good enough or a lot better than what is available. But we also know that, look, on average, on the large scale over time, there will be some mistakes coming through that might have severe or tiny consequences, and we just need to keep in mind.
Mhm. Yeah.
Well, what do you guys think?
In fact, I agree with you, Ignas, concerning this point. Okay, but I will switch just to another, okay, to another side, just to add something in addition to what you mentioned. Okay, I I always, okay, based on my personal experience, okay, I always think about the AI the AI explainability and the trustworthy. Okay, why? Because one of the questions that I always ask myself is the following. Okay, we know that we have the bias in the data, for example. Okay, so the question now, how I can identify and detect this bias? What's the mechanism that I can use in order to detect this bias in the data and see there is bias in the data? Okay, this is something hard to do. Why? Because till now the AI models that we have, and I think the majority of the AI models that we are building, okay, this AI's models itself, they don't know what's the explainability is. Okay, why? Because sometimes also the term of explainability is a bias, and it's related to a given context. Okay, what is explainable for you as a positive thing, it could be, for example, a negative in another context. Okay, so this the problem of detecting, for example, the bias and the bias mitigation. Okay, uh, these two keys still have the big impact. Okay, on order to build a relevant and accurate AI models that can, for example, deal with statistics, deal with data, and so on and so on. So the question that here, to just summarize, how I can identify the bias in my data. What is the there is there any mechanism, for example, is there any framework that I need to follow in order to see, oh, this decision it's not good. Okay, so this means that there is a bias in the data. Okay, this is, I think, one of the hard questions that we need to think about.
Um, One of the labels that has been used to describe LLMs and generative AI is a fancy calculator. So you take all these inputs that may or may not have a known source. There's no there's no provenance because all these things get smushed together as tokens that represent things that we like to understand have some human concept, but to the machine is it's nothing but a piece of a number, and it's only a statistical equation that whatever you ask for based on the training that it has, it's going to give you something that sounds about or is statistically close to the thing that you're looking for. So that is an excellent point. What if you train LLM with a population of people that love donuts, and you're asking the LLM, I would like to eat healthy, balanced diet or something that is pleasant, um, but I'm diabetic. It could suggest to eat a donut based on the trained data, but it has no sense of concepts. It has no sense of uh, consequences. It's only going to tell you based on the information that it was trained. And if that information is biased, the resulting product is going to be biased as well. But then, how do they know if their perception is biased, if that's how they live their world, or if they haven't uncovered some scientific theory that tells them donuts has high sugar, it's bad for you if you're diabetic? I don't know. It's not so straightforward of an answer, especially if there's no symbolic or human reasoning in those things.
Huh.
Um,
Yeah, I agree. That's a very, very interesting example. I never thought about donuts. And what I think also where another kind of worm is that, let's say, like, like even we as a human in the room, I don't know if we could get to say, share definition what bias is and to what extent. If, let's say, like, if, because I don't think bias is binary, it's either they or not. If we map it, oh, like how much bias is there, let's say like 1 to 100, you know, it would most likely end up somewhere in the range. And it's like we might take it, maybe what looks a little bit biased for me, could look a lot more biased for somebody else. So maybe like one way how to, let's say, make things still work for my personal context would be, for example, if I take black box, let's say like LLM that does something that is trained on data I have no idea on, if I could, let's say, enhance it by training it on the data that I have, and then kind of like run the model, test the results, and see if, like, based on my understanding of my bias, based on the data that I have, and plus some black box that we use to bootstrap to speed things up, if the end result looks good enough. And I think this is where I've seen a lot of, let's say, like boutique LLMs going, that, let's say, like they sometimes take things out of the box when there's no schema, there's no target definition, or no anything else, but to make it usable and production grade, like biggest companies who have like loads of their own data, they train that on top. So they kind of like reduces the, let's say, the exposure or amplitude of this black box, and they say, look, like we tested, and black box, maybe it was 80% right, maybe 22. However, like on our data, it was like 87% correct or right or fair. And let's say at least we know in our context, in our data, let's say like this is how good or how bad it is, and that we know if we can use that or not.
Yeah, it's more of a doing not only doing quality control on these algorithms, AI algorithms, and LLMs being one of them or part of them, but also it's more of a, you can also some sort of do a ranking of how reliable this is, or eventually any algorithm is biased. There's some biases in that. So what is the biasness? Which direction is it leaning? Is it leaning toward more being conservative, or no, being more open? Is it leaning towards, like, what is the degree, the quality of these algorithms? Because I feel like in the future, we are the equity, the concept of equity is going to be around, like, who has access to stronger algorithms. Because if you think about it, like, we browse on the web pages, there's a profile of us. Like, if we whatever we do, it's being keep tracked, and they're creating a profile of our activities and what we're doing. And there's always an algorithms that is providing us recommendations, or even making decisions that would impact our life. And so some sort of like inequity would be in terms of people that have more resources and have access to stronger algorithms, versus people that have less resources and they have to use lower quality algorithms that maybe were available for a cheaper price. So that's how I see even the quality of the algorithms, the LLMs, the any of the other AI models are going to impact the quality of our life.
Yeah. Here I want just to ask a question. Using LLM, okay, is, for example, or does that mean by using only LLM, I can create an intelligent system? So does the LLM is the only component that we need, for example, in order to say I have an AI system? I don't think from my end, yeah, because LLM still just one component of a big system, okay. For my opinion, LLMs are not smart, okay. Just models are trained to take decisions, okay, and these things are not smart enough in order to guide us. So the question, what are the other components that we need in order to say that we have a solid AI system? This is just a question, okay, based on what in fact Ignas mentioned and Kati.
That's a good question. I wish I had the answer. Not today.
I just want to say, there's such an obsession for LLMs, but there's so many things that have already been solved in a very simplistic manner. Case switches, if else statements. I mean, you can map out pretty accurately, if you study the behavior of people,
No.
what kind of decision branches they have to take in any kind of engagement, and map it out. And then the LLM can only then carry with personalized engagements, but it need not carry the logic to execute an action or a task in a system on behalf of a user. So there's a lot of simplicity that is kind of getting overlooked for the sake of playing with this new toy. Um, and intelligence is a relative term. Does it perform the function in an efficient manner, in a graceful manner? I think that's a form of intelligence. Doesn't have to have a lot of moving parts to be intelligent. But yeah, I don't know. I guess it depends how you define intelligence.
Yeah.
There's one question I'd like to ask. We're talking about shoulds, we're talking about coulds, woulds, all these uds. I'd like to ask, based on our perception and who's responsible for these things, I'd like to ask who is responsible for enforcing these things, because we can have all these guidelines and things, but behavior won't change unless there's some sort of enforcement. People don't pay their taxes. unless the IRS exists. So how do we reason with this?
That is a great question. I don't have an answer to that.
Uh, no
Yeah, in fact,
hypothetical.
I am thinking, I think like, in the behavior theory 101, it's like always about carrots and sticks. So like IRS is a big bag of like, like loads of sticks. But I'm trying to see, like what could be, let's say, like attractive carrots in the situation. And maybe a good analogy could be, let's say, if we take the whole like, open source concept, where like, why do people write and publish and share codes and modules and applications for free for everybody to use, or just just because for like no, let's say, for like not really sticks, but like sometimes you just like feel good if you could contribute. Or for example, you manage to build something good that works, or it helps somebody. Sometimes it just like internal intrinsic motivation just to share it, to put it out there in the open and see what happens. And that happened with like like loads of languages, let's say, like tags, and like libraries for coding and like for doing, let's say, like people just like do it. They sometimes they enjoy solving complex problems that are very hard, and it's like no one's getting paid, or well, sometimes they do, so that could be another different carrot. But let's say, like, if you figure it out, I mean, like, some of the people just get fame, and that is a big driver to try to something. I mean, like, things still happen in science that they say, look, somebody worked out this like maths problem after 100 years. Nobody knows why, but like people did it, and it still works. So I kind of think that like, if there would be some motivation for the bigger community or for the network, that it, or for example, like governance did with like open data initiatives. So they published some data, not because like they were forced to, but they thought, look, we don't know what's going to come out of it, but there are like loads of people who could tinker, play with it, and sometimes good things come out of it, and you can't quite predict the whole innovation, but like that just like step forward if everybody does a little bit. Like maybe that could be some carrots that just like happen over time.
Okay, so maybe to kind of extend that concept of the IRS and carrots and sticks, it looks like you're drinking carrot juice. We can talk about the gluttonous nature of these algorithms. I mean, they just abuse and consume so much energy, and the popularization of these technologies and the way that it's being played with, and people are talking about, oh, we need to get more hardware, and that hardware consumes more power, and we need to build nuclear power plants, and we need to use fresh water supplies to keep the power plants cool. I mean, this is going far beyond the silly notion of like, I want to play with this fancy calculator. Okay, but what about the infrastructure required to sustain it? We're talking social responsibility. What about the environmental? We have polar bears that have smaller and smaller and smaller ice caps. I mean, the consumption and production of energy is only adding to the production of carbon emissions.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I really don't know enough to comment on that, and I think that's also a topic where there are loads of people with like loads of opinions, and sometimes want to see, oh yeah, the new like GPT 5 or 6, they're gonna be that massive, that many billion gazillion of, let's say, like metrics. That looks like really gets too big to comprehend. But let's say, like one maybe small thing I've seen sometime recently, saying that look like the future might be not LLMs but like SLMs, small language models. So maybe we might reach that degree of saturation where generic LLMs, they are big enough so that they can reasonably or adequately understand, let's say, like human interaction and express, not necessarily replicate the way of thinking, but for classic use cases that we will need to do, maybe 80% or 90% or 20%, who knows, might be like micro models that are very good at something small. that they are not massive. They don't take like loads of storage or compute, and they do just like one small thing really really well. And that could could also maybe be the way how things go. I don't think it's certain that energy consumption and scaling and number of parameters is going to go up for forever. I mean, it could, but it doesn't have to. It seemed like probably 15 years ago we said, look, like now let's say the computer processors and semiconductors, they're getting more powerful, like following the curve that every 18 months, let's say we get like twice the storage, twice the speed and something. But like at some point it kind of like we stopped talking about it because we realized, look, like we don't need more storage now of like average person, average computer. There are like super data centers where that's a topic, but let's say now like my laptop for like last 10 years, it had the same amount of storage, and it kind of like worked. So maybe it could be that it will just like flatten out. I don't know. It's just a theory. I have like no data, but
In fact, I like what you mentioned, Ignas, concerning the SLM. Is this term currently around in the literature, or just something that you come up with right now?
no, I didn't come up with it. I read about it not too long
Yeah. Okay.
ago.
Good.
I would
Yeah.
have to look it up. Like it seems like it was around for a bit, probably maybe didn't pick it
Yeah.
up either in the Google search, or maybe it's like a relatively new thing, but I don't know.
Because I like the idea of creating the SLM, just small LLM that can, for example, excel in specific things. Okay, things. So this really can be helpful, okay, in order to also give to all people the opportunity to try LLMs. Okay, so, and yeah, it's wonderful. I think I need, yeah, to read about this concept. In fact, I really like it. Yeah.
How many parameters do you need to have a accurate model? Do you really need to have all this Reddit stories and bad advice and opinionated content, or is there a way to compress that the training of a model around a specific domain?
I think there are surely ways. I think I would approach that everything, like consultants say, everything depends. So it depends on the use case. Last year, I worked around, for example, like a lot on supply chain documents, where they come in, let's say, in like all the languages you can imagine, but like it's somehow about products, about shipping and invoices and so on, legal master agreements. So yes, you need to have some legal education to understand the context. So while general LLM could be helpful to understand, let's say, like the semantics and the meaning between, let's say, the objects and items inside the document. Once you have that, I mean, like already they like would not be really needed if later on I say, hey, does this document like say something about shipping? Does it say something about like customs declaration? So let's say like to make some like simple queries, the entire massive, let's say, like human knowledge base, like it might not be required, or let's say like it's very unlikely that it would make sense. So that's why like lots of companies, they say, look, we take trained LLMs out of the box as a starting point, but then let's say for what we're actually going to use it, we train it on our very specific, very narrow use case, bunch of, let's say, documents or something, and let's say like what we're expecting. So I don't know, a big part of that is just, let's say, like querying document. Oh, does it contain this? Is this? Let's say, like, if the task is not to be creative, but let's say if the goal is to be precise and reliable, then I think all this creativity doesn't quite apply, or let's say it would not be desired. However, if you go into, let's say, like Gen AI space and you want the LLMs to be creative, or like come up me with a melody, or like write me a poem or something else, then I think like Reddit could be a source of inspiration for a certain context. But I think a lot of for like maybe boring, or let's say like B2B industry applications, that creative aspect is really really small, and we just kind of like want it to be reliable and precise and kind of like don't make things up. So in that sense, let's say like for the model, ability to invent new things might not be that important. That goes beyond, let's say, like simple like Q&A. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. I want to draw on Katie's and Bilal's background. Yesterday, Bilal gave a presentation on organizing principles for knowledge graphs. And knowledge graphs are these compositions of uh, schemas that you develop that represent human concepts in a way that is understandable by machines. And Katie yesterday gave a presentation on developing a mesh network of IoT sensors that help you understand the status or state of a physical location and track whether or not it's at risk for flood alerts. So
Mhm.
these modeling concepts, why aren't they being employed more prolifically, and why are we relying on these modeling concepts rather than using more of the gluttonous algorithms that, as you said, Ignis, are used for creative purposes, but for the boring day-to-day reliable business, we need a little bit more of the modeling. So where's that gap?
So I just wanted to ask, so actually the focus of the flood is really is all about the modeling. So we, I mean, from a perspective, the solution that we work on, it's for us is not about, you know, the mesh network of the sensors. For us is about the data that is coming from the mesh network of the sensors, or sometimes is also all the publicly available data. So if, for example, in case of the flood, you know, USGS has already sensors installed. So sometimes we take on projects and we don't even need to install any additional sensors or any additional hardware. We can work all with all the publicly available data to be able to apply our auto ML and our, you know, forecasting and optimization and simulation capabilities to really tell them when you're going to see water, you know, rising in your area, or what the depth of, and the extension of the water is going to be, and how much the land is going to be inundated. So this really, I mean, truly is more of an AI approach into, you know, solving natural disaster problems that would hopefully lead into sustainability from a, you know, environmental perspective. But really, our focus is leveraging the data that's available to be able to do prediction, forecasting, preparedness for when there's going to be flood happening. So our focus is purely AI based.
Yeah. Yeah. So I want to add something here. In fact, uh, as what Kati mentioned, their focus on the AI, and to create these AI models, they are using data. Okay, so there is something important that I want to mention here, is the first layer of the AI layers. It's the knowledge representation. Okay, so a lot of people, okay, don't give to this layer, okay, an intention. Okay, and they don't focus on the knowledge representation layer. And here I will talk more specifically on semantic data. Okay, on this term. Why? Because in fact, before giving to any algorithm a set of data to train your model, okay, you need to think about what's the the relationship between this data, because currently we are using, for example, the data embedded in spreadsheet, the data embedded in Snowflake, the data embedded in systems. Okay, but what we don't, we have the data, but what we don't have the knowledge. And let me explain this now, because semantic data in fact plays crucial role not only in sustainable AI, okay, but also in all the fields. Why? Because semantic can give to your problem a context, okay, and the meaning, and the relationship between the data point, okay, and this helps, for example, in creating a more intelligent and effective sustainable AI. So let me, for example, just talk about the data coming from the IoT sensors. Okay, now this data is coming from different sources of information, from different sources, and
Um, I think we lost Bilal for a little bit there. Um,
I was getting to the critical point.
yeah, that's what tends to happen, right? Right before you get to to the punchline of the
Very
joke.
big spoiler. Oh, find out in part 2.
Now it's time for the commercials. No, Ignis, I appreciate the use case that you were illustrating as well.
I'm
Whether
here. I'm
oh,
Oh,
well, when he comes back, I guess we can pick up part 2. But Ignis, I really appreciate the creativity and the context of
sorry.
the use case that you were describing yesterday with the supply chain, where there's all these dynamic interactions, dynamic actors that they're exchanging context, and you need to kind of compare very quickly what is the difference between 2 points of information or 2 points of
Yep.
artifacts that share similar information in context. But I also see the long range computational efficiencies of having an existing model like what Katie and Bilal.
Mhm.
Bilal, if you want to continue.
Yeah, just I want to add 2 points. We need a unified view of the data. What does that mean? Semantic data allows for the integration of diverse data sources by providing a common framework for understanding and relating the data. So this helps in creating a comprehensive view of sustainability challenges and opportunity. Because if we can use a unified view and, for example, create like uh, one place that all the data that is coming from different sources can be embedded in this, for example, the common place. Okay, we can create uh, a standard vocabulary that can help us and help also the machines to understand the data. And here I want to add something. Instead of training the machine learning models using the data, we need to train machine learning models using the knowledge, not the data. We need to give to the to the machine learning algorithms also the relationship between the data. Okay, for example, instead of train Apple, I need to train Apple is an organization with the relationship. Okay, so this can give us, okay, a clarity. Okay, and also can help us to solve a lot of problems. This is why we need to think about how we can train the models with the knowledge and not with the data only.
Going back to the carrot and the stick, how do we keep track of the consumption of energy? I think that would be a very efficient stick to use for companies that are disproportionately just abusing LLMs despite their gluttonous nature. I know there's people that create multi agenic systems and they buy all these computers and they train them to act as virtual people or virtual actors, and they just consume credits, but that also consumes power. So, any thoughts around that? Kind of finding a way to make it transparent and encourage the usage of smaller or more computational efficient algorithms.
That's a difficult one. Yeah, excellent question, which is, I don't think it's that simple. So I think, on the one hand, thinking I've seen some previous clouds providers who are like try to, let's say, like self-report and say, look, like we are building data centers, but they will be, for example, carbon neutral, or they will be powered by, let's say, like green energy, whether it's like wind, solar, water, or something else. To some extent that may be true, maybe not. Let's assume it's true. I don't know. However, I'm thinking about another thing. So for example, whenever we are using cloud to deploy, to store, or to compute or something, like we often, let's say, for processing, we have a choice of the global, let's say, like geographic locations, where to store the data, where to process. And sometimes we do it we make the decision based on cost. Sometimes we do it based on, let's say, like compliance. Like for example, Switzerland, for a lot of reasons, let's say, like Swiss, like client data or transaction data or something, it has to be stored and processed on the data centers, in the servers, in like within the borders of Switzerland, for some legal things. So even if it's more expensive, maybe if it's potentially less green or more green, I don't know, companies kind of like make those decisions because they say, look, like for us to run this operation, those are requirements, and let's say like maybe we would like to process it in US East because it's cheaper, but let's say like our legal and compliance, like say, look guys, we have the sticks ready, that's not gonna fly. I think where it gets more interesting is like where the large language models or foundational models get trained. So it's not necessarily the models that we're using, because I could use it in one jurisdiction, but like maybe what's under the hood has been assembled and trained and iterated on somewhere else. And well, first of all, like I don't have visibility on that. Another thing, like I don't know if that would matter. So I think this is where it might get a bit more difficult to understand, where things happened, and maybe the solution could be like managing at the higher level, like at the grid. Even if we say, look, like we consumed a little bit here, a little bit there, but like overall, like do we consume more, or let's say like we know the total amount that we are producing, how much of that is like green energy, how much of that is something else, and let's say like what does it look like for storage and some other operations, and let's say like what matters, what can we shift, and at the end of the day, which stakeholders care and for which reasons. Because like if we say, look, like we offer, for example, the way the energy sector in Switzerland works, so every household, like you can choose depending on what you need. There are lots of providers, but you have a choice of like 2 or 3 tariffs. You can have the cheapest one, you have like more green, and you have like the full green energy that costs you a little bit more. So there are options, you have choice, and then based on that you make a decision if you would like it to be green. If you can afford it to be green, then you say, look, like it's worth the premium for me because for reasons. So maybe that's like one way of thinking about it. Yeah, to
I
Bilal,
would add to what Ignace said, I want to add, seems like, for all these, AI models and like LLMs, also there needs to be a supply chain of these models in terms of, just transparency in terms of the hardware that have been used, where they have been used, where they've been sourced to train these models. What are the data sources? Where these data sources are coming from? Obviously, the algorithms, neural networks, and all that they use them for training. Maybe it might be proprietary. So I don't know how much we can enforce that, but even, supply chain of how these LLMs are being created, or how any of these AI models are being created, from hardware to software to data, I think it's something that needs to be transparent, and needs to be created as well. So then, when we're interacting with an AI model, we know, in terms of has this been developed responsibly? Is it, the data set that has been trained on? Are these data sets coming from, who knows? I mean, there are data sets that don't have their PII removed. So are these data sets that used for training the AI models, are they the right data sets? Do they have their PIIs removed or not? Like how these data sets being sourced. Sometimes these and it's really happens that they are AI models that are trained on data sets that have not been, that people haven't given their consent that you can use my data. And so even these data are being collected without the data owner's consent. So that could be part of transparency and the supply chain of creating all these different components that comes into create this AI model, or an LLM or any other AI model. So I think the concept of supply chain should also apply to them as well.
Yeah. And this is what we can call, in fact, it's the data provenance in AI systems. Okay, because in fact, the provenance of the data, it's very important. Okay, as you mentioned, Kati, and because I will just add something. One challenge, in fact, and this challenge is related to the ethical and the bias concerns. Always the bias concerns. Okay, so because without tracking data origins and processing, detecting, for example, and addressing bias introduced during data collection or transformation is more difficult, because we don't have any background knowledge about this data from where this data is coming. And also, we need to think about the ethical compliance, because ensuring the AI system adhere to ethical standards and regulations becomes problematic without clear documentation of data handling practices. Okay, so this is why uh, always, okay, we need to think about how we can add the data provenance layer. That can be like, for example, a metadata layer for the data, and this the metadata layer can help us to explain and understand the data that we have and the data that we are using in order to train a specific model. So yeah, this is what I want to add. And the data provenance is one of the challenges, okay, that also we need to bypass and we need to solve in order to understand the data well.
Pardon my ignorance, but I understand that the usage of an LLM is part of the training of an LLM. If you incorporate some sort of input, that becomes part of the whole. Am I wrong there, or am I right? Confirm or deny, or skip to the next one.
Can you repeat, Joaquin, please?
The usage of an LLM contributes to its training. So if I make a prompt and I say, "Are donuts yummy?" and I just produce like 100,000 queries on the consumption of donuts, will I not be training the LLM to have more tokens on that concept?
I think the answer, it depends. By default, it's probably true. Though I think now for certain things, for enterprise slates, there are ways to kind of like opt out or to keep that to like, limited to the scope of the organization, at least in theory. To what extent that's implemented, it's hard to know, but I think like, it's it's an assumption or some claims that like some companies, there was some controversy some years ago, some weeks ago, when big communication tool company, they pushed out an update of their, let's say, like, TNCs, where saying that, look, like, unless you opt out, we will kind of like, spy and use all of your, let's say, like, messages to train the model. And then the tool has mainly been used in B2B, so it was a bit, oh yeah, we didn't like that, but that was a sneaky way to do it.
The reason I ask is because I know that there have been cases where people have displayed that public facing LLMs show PII information for people that have been engaging with it mechanical Turk style. So if something's publicly facing and everybody's engaging with it, they're sort of feeding it and training it their own personal information and biases. So there's no way to direct the provenance of something that is crowdsourced, essentially, right? That sort of adds to make this complex problem even more hairy.
Yes, yeah. And I have like one more thought that I would like to share, which will probably contradict whatever I said, like, 5 minutes ago. But then I thought it's a panel. It's good to have different opinions. So when we speak about, let's say, like, regulation and like bias and, let's say, like, what's fair and the right thing to do, I think, what's very important is to kind of like put ourselves into the context that say, look, like, what is ethical in one country or one region at one point in time. Like, it's not shared across the world and across the time. Like, for example, when I was at university, probably 15 years ago, the professor said, look, like, guys, do you know where did that child labor prohibition came from? They say, look, like, that as a concept right now in the Western society seems like a no-go and it's a wrong thing to do. But they say, look, like, in like 150 years ago, like, that was common practice across the world. And like, like, we're just like a little bit more ahead than somebody. And it came actually, from the case of the chimney boys in the UK, when there was like some chimney boy who cleaned the chimney and he fell and he died. And, this is where the law came from. But, that has been a standard practice for like hundreds of years. And what is fair or ethical also, like, within the same time in different geographic locations, I think, like, it is not that straightforward or it's kind of like debatable. So we also need to keep it in mind. And also, I was thinking, what is the analogy? If we say we want to understand the lineage where the data came from, how much bias was there in the source of the source. If we take a car, let's say let's say it's sold in US, we know, well, most of them, we don't know where the engine came from, what happened. Maybe the engine was assembled in Europe and components came from somewhere in Asia, but do we actually know it? And do people still care? I think, the further upstream in supply chain you go, the less people are maybe by default kind of interested in the details, or they say, look, yes, now it's made in somewhere. It could be a brand of quality, or could be say, look, it was assembled in Italy, but let's say maybe it was produced somewhere where it was cheaper, but can we still brand it as an Italian car? So I think it kind of also depends how far we want to go. So if let's say my direct input source, I say, look, it didn't look biased to me, but let's say if that source received the data from another source and another source, it might be nice to wish that it was unbiased, but I think practically we might not have the bandwidth to investigate it. And it just whenever we signing up to some shop, or we go to a new website, we get 7 kilometers of cookies text, and we just say, yeah, we just scroll to the bottom, agree to terms and conditions, but nobody reads it, because it's kind of the trade-off between practicality and, I don't know, sometimes security, sometimes transparency, and we just need to pick a point on the range. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah.
I think in this conversation we've exposed, we don't know where the data comes from. We don't know how it's trained in mass, and we don't know who regulates it. It's a black box. If we want to be responsible, I mean, we need to be able to empower third-party private actors who respond to the public, but also are sort of not responding to the government, and kind of can help regulate this from a neutral standpoint. But also, as you said, Ignis, your rules and Katie's rules and Bilal's rules and my rules are all different rules. And depending on the territory that we're in and the society and the culture, those things will change. And over time, they will change as we learn to engage with these technologies. So I've only walked away with more questions in this conversation than I have answers.
We will have to do the part 2.
Yeah. Anything that you guys would like to add to the tie off of this responsible AI for sustainability and sustainable AI panel discussion?
I think it's an exciting topic, and in upcoming 2 to 3 years, we will have a lot of more certainty and clarity once processes and best practices or standard ways of doing things will kind of settle. I think we just kind of need to accept that right now. Look, everybody's still trying to work it out. So sometimes companies are not necessarily evil, but they make a decision between speed and quality, or bureaucracy, or startups say, look, we will test in production, or our clients will test it. So it might when we uncover things, I think we just kind of get better. But I try not to assume that people make evil decisions by default. They often do, but not always. But it could be just right now, there's no best practice, or how much should I document, and let's say what is a good bias, what is a good enough, and how to describe it and how to interpret it. So I think the researchers are still kind of working on it. They try to see for the consensus best practice and also practical applications, so that it could be understood. Because if I publish, let's say 20-page, let's say explanation how to use some field, maybe it will make sense to 2 people in the world, but for the rest, it will be overkill, and they will still not understand it, because it's like reading legal documents. So it might be, let's say very well explained, but not really well understood. So I think we are somewhere in the balance there, and some companies try to do more documentation up front. The others say, look, we'll do something, or let's say we'll react once somebody tells us what else to do, because we just don't know what's expected.
All right, so we'll wait and see. And for the audience and everybody watching at home, you're gonna have to come back for part 2. Thank you guys for this wonderful panel discussion. Bilal, Ignis, and Katie. We are going to do a part 2. So
Yes.
we're going to take a short break. And once we come back, we'll have another panel discussion discussing whether artificial intelligence has some form of sentience. I'll let you join that one and join in this discussion. But yeah, thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.